So, welcome to the I Spit on Your podcast event. So let me just introduce you to our spinsters of horror, as they call themselves. The spinsters of horror, Jessica and Kelly, flew onto the horror scene in July of 2018 to assist in filling the void of female voices in podcasting with their show, I Spit on Your Podcast. As women, they knew that the genre is dominated by the masculine perspective, so they felt it was important to celebrate and encourage female horror fans, while at the same time remaining inclusive to all who love what horror has to offer. I Spit on Your Podcast is where two metal witches discuss horror movies and sometimes other mediums with thoughtful analysis, research, and passion. It's a semi-academic show with a dash of feminism, a sprinkle of sarcasm, but rich with intrigue and black comedy. They aren't afraid to tackle a tough subject matter like the rape revenge genre or stalking and obsession in the Halloween franchise, but they also like to have fun with discussions on Elvira, Buffy, heavy metal horror, and more. All right, so on to your episode on satanic feminism.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Well, first off, we definitely want to say a huge thank you to Final Girls Berlin Film Festival for accepting our pitch, because they're very intrigued by it. And just for this wonderful opportunity to kind of present our podcast live to everyone. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Beautiful. Morbidly Beautiful is your macabre home away from home with horror news, reviews, editorials, and more. And they support everyone in the horror community with from special effects artists, indie filmmakers, writers, women, LGBTQ folks, and so much more. So please go check out our family over at morbidlybeautiful.com to find out more. And now on with the show.
So welcome to I Spit on Your Podcast, a monthly horror podcast brought to you by the Spinsters of Horror. This is the time once a month where Jess puts down her bloody knitting needles and I step away from the TV to discuss horror movies and sometimes other horror mediums with thoughtful analysis, research, and passion.
And like you guys already know, if you've been following us and listening to us for almost 3 years now, coming up to in July, we started our podcast, I Spit on Your Podcast, in July of 2018 because we felt like needed to be a void, needed to be filled for female voices in podcasting. So as you know, the horror genre is dominated mostly by a masculine perspective, and we felt it was really time to celebrate and encourage other horror female fans, at the same time remaining inclusive to all those who love horror. So you can find me behind the scenes, editing the podcast, writing and crafting, while Kelly, my co-host over here, is normally found in her dark basement with a mug of black coffee.
They're usually black.
Heading up our social media. And we're really excited for our first festival appearance, and I'm super nervous, and this is why I'm making mistakes already.
In this episode, we're finding our inner dark goddesses and discussing satanic feminism. So through the films Don't Deliver Us from Evil, Alucarda, Jennifer's Body, and The Witch, we will explore the representation and the importance of Satan as the image of an anti-patriarchal idol and source of empowerment for women. By highlighting the 3 main satanic opponents of the patriarchy, we have Eve, the witch, and the succubus. We will show that there is strength in darkness and power within embracing the ideology of Satanism. So pick your poison and listen on if you dare.
So I'm just going to do a little screen share for everyone right now. Got to get our intro in there for all you guys, which is Robies by Dance with the Dead. So, Kelly, why did we choose these films?
Jessica, why did we choose these films? Satanic feminism. Well, I'll briefly say first off that we've kind of been flirting with the idea for probably 2 years now. I feel like ever since our Cosmic Horror episode in 2018. Yep. I realize now that's technically an old episode of ours, but we started kind of talking about it then. And even before then, within like our first year, you brought it up on our appearance over at the Dead Ringers podcast, actually, when we talked about the witch.
Well, yeah, I've been interested in satanic feminism ever since the Faculty of Horror, which seems to inspire a lot of the stuff that I'm doing. They talked about the book, Satanic Feminism, Satan, a Liberator for Women by Prax Fernald. And I've been super interested in that. And I remember getting the book. Yeah, Kelly's got the big copy of it there. And I just thought, it was time, and when we saw the call out for the film festival here, we're just like, this is it. We are now going to touch upon satanic feminism, because we also, for the last year, have done a couple episodes based around Satanism. When we did our heavy metal horror, we touched upon satanic panic, and then we did in our episode on satanic cults. And of course, the idea of women would come up. And then on top of that too, Kelly and I are big, huge fans of Twin Temple and love the satanic melodies of the group and of Satan being both a woman as well as a liberator for women. So I just thought it was time to do this. And when Kelly and I started doing research into different films that we felt really represented these different aspects of satanic feminism, we came across these 4 films and did some research into them. We felt, okay, some of these are films that we've all wanted to see. Some of them are films we've seen many times because they're favorites of ours. And we're just like, let's open up this dialogue and talk about satanic feminism.
Absolutely. So why don't you start us off, Jess, and talking about introducing folks, because not everybody really knows what that means. And that's something that we learned, recently, what the concept and idea of satanic feminism, like, what does that mean, really?
Really, it goes back to this idea of the figure of Satan being an ally for women. So often, and we've seen historically, women are often accused of being influenced by the devil. Since the time of Eve eating the apple, to the folklore of Lilith being, leaving Eden because she did not want to be submissive to a man. And in both of those figures, we see the figure of Satan offering these women a choice to no longer be dominated. And this tends to go back to, but then this is said a lot about women in terms of being evil because, we're sexually promiscuous, or when we're single, we're independent. If we're, homosexual, it goes back to this idea that, well, this is still evil. However, we're finding out that there's this literary concept of Satan, a lot of times written during the Romantics, where they use the image of Satan to challenge the absolute authority of the church, because they felt that what was happening with the laws and things that were being instituted was they were unjust, and they discouraged free thinking and agency, which Satan, and we learned about when we talked about the Satanic Temple and the Church of Satan, is Satan's all about freedom and about liberty and rebellion. So then you come along and you have our own concept of feminism, the advocacy of women's rights on the basis of equality of the sexes. However, our church at times deemed this to be satanic. This is not appropriate, that women should not be fighting for their rights or standing up for themselves or being disobedient to their husbands. And if they are, they're being influenced by a malignant force, something evil, something, they couldn't do this. But then you get some of these writers who come along and they start flirting with this idea of feminism, but then the literary image of Satan, and we get this idea of satanic feminism, which is...
Absolutely.
Yeah, go jump in.
Sorry.
I could just keep going on this.
I know, it's so interesting. But so folks, I'm sure we all know the tale of Eve and the serpent and the tree of knowledge and the apple, the forbidden fruit and everything. This is going back centuries old in the Bible, Genesis 3. And we all know who wrote this book and who has been interpreting it for centuries. Priests, men, our church fathers. And so those early interpretations of Eve were very negative. They're condescending. Essentially, like Jess is saying, women are weak, we're gullible, we're curious by nature, rebellious by nature, and that's seen as a super negative thing. You're like, that is not your place. Men are superior to you. That's not what you should be doing with your time. Right? And then so early on, Eve was seen as this like temptress. So initially she wasn't necessarily seen as a temptress, but that came later on. And, what's really interesting about this, women are supposed to be silent and submissive, but Eve was deeply curious. And those are where the counter readings start coming into play, right? They're like, okay, well, let's look at this differently. Was it bad, that she wanted something more and outside of the Garden of Eden. There was something right there that, you know, just I think she thought that it was like worth the risk. Like, what's the worst that can happen? There's got to be something more than this. And then Satan comes in and encourages this woman to seek knowledge and, you know, break this, you know, the confines of bondage with and submissiveness to Adam and to God in this Garden of Eden, and essentially liberated her. And so, you know, for centuries, because of our church fathers and people interpreting this, prevented women from having any kind of agency, bodily autonomy, or anything. They prevented them from having like higher education for centuries. And so it's amazing to look at this counter reading as a source of empowerment and seeing that Satan actually was an ally.
Well, and it's super interesting because often the Bible goes back to saying about, you know, the sin of the first woman, and thus the sin of the first woman will be the curse of all for all women, which is thus womanhood, and the fact that when women go through labor, our pain while giving birth is our punishment from God for seeking knowledge and being curious or stepping beyond the bounds of what we're supposed to be following, right? And in a lot of religious church leaders, like they run on that and they say, well, do you not see this? That Eve, women are inherently evil. They have this weakness to them. They're evil. They're able to be easily misaligned by Satan, a serpent. And this will end up leading to men being kicked out of paradise. And then on top of that, other religions like the Calvin and Protestants would talk about Eve having strayed from her husband's protection. And that on top of that, because Adam should have known better, he should not have let Eve out of his sight. And that would have never happened. So it's once again, it was like this idea that you cannot let women out from under your control. You need to keep them contained within a box, within the domestic sphere, to keep them in control. Because any woman who steps outside the box is a transgressor. They're seen as evil. And what's really interesting is that during the Romantic periods and the timing of where they started this idea of Satanic feminism, you get this idea of embracing the outsider status and using that as a tool to dismantle archaic and oppressive modes of oppression. It's all about bodily autonomy, which is central to Satanic philosophy and a lot of Satanic feminism. We're all about fighting for our own female bodily autonomy, having control over our reproductive rights, dismantling the religious institutions that influence the secular rules and the regulations that keep us from being independent beings and having control over our own bodies. So when Milton was talking about the portrayal of, and this is where this whole flip the script of Eve came from the Romantics, when they were flirting with feminism, flirting with like satanic ideas because they didn't like the amount of control the church was having over society in general, the lack of creativity and the lack of social liberties. They take this idea of Eve and they say, well, guess what? Let's flip this script. Let's say that Eve and Satan saw each other as equals, and Satan's like, I believe that you deserve knowledge, you deserve equality, and I'm here to provide that to you. We are allies in this arrangement.
Absolutely. So essentially, what you're saying is that Satanism itself, and then within that Satanic feminism, it's a philosophy and an idea, a concept of rebellion, independence,
yes,
which is obviously vital, or at least the independence aspect of it, to general feminist philosophy. We need to be able, the freedom to do what we want with our lives and our bodies without interference, which is what God and the church and generally cisgendered men in these authoritative roles want to do. So Satanic feminism kind of like takes it one step further, and it's bodily autonomy, like you said, yeah, absolutely essential to the philosophy. I almost said our. Oh, am I a satanic feminist now? Probably.
We converted. I feel like we're converting.
I'm probably converted. But essentially, Satan represents defiance, rebellion, independence, wisdom, self-empowerment, autonomous mind, subjectivity, self-sufficiency, creativity, radical freedom. And yeah, Satan is our ally, a feminist ally, the emancipator of women, and providing that opportunity to desire and get more from our life and to oppose all of those rules. So like we said in our little intro, there are three main figures. Thank you from our book here, our main text and source of absolute inspiration for this, are three main figures of female relationships with Satan, and then these three figures that are like the main opponents of the patriarchy, which will boil it down, kind of scratch the surface a little bit of it and talk about these three images. But there's Eve, our first transgressor, with also a dabbling of Lilith, our demonic woman, our succubus or demon's lover, and then the witch, our sinister rebel.
Which I love in all of this, because in all these three imageries that we're talking about, these archetypes, is Lilith is seen throughout this, her influence, her impact. And I've written about her quite a few times. And I know she's really just based off of Jewish folklore, but, you know, in all areas of European and Jewish folklore, like talk to her about, you know, being the wife of Satan, the first woman to say, you know, screw you. I'm not gonna lay under you. I want on top. I'm in control here. You know, when she's being forced to go back into the garden and she tells the angels, no, I am not going back. And they're like, well, if you don't go back to the garden, we're going to kill all your children. She's like, fine, and I'll kill all your children. Like, I'm not gonna, you're not going to force me to do something I don't want to do. Right. Yeah. And that's where the image of the succubus, apparently, like the succubus is related back to Lilith, and the idea of the witch. You know, so many women relate to the idea of Lilith as a figure, as a figurehead for witches. You know, she was a main character in Sabrina, the new Sabrina the Teenage Witch series that came out, which I thought was amazing. But you're right. So yeah,
absolutely. So let's get into our first films of the episode, Alucarda and Don't Deliver Us from Evil. So Jess, what's your story around these two films? What's your experience with them?
Well, my experience with these both films, they're both the first time watch for the podcast, but I've heard about both of them. I've heard about Alucarda so many times. Like I read a great article about Alucarda in Grimm magazine, one of their issues. And so there are films that I was familiar with, but I hadn't had the opportunity to watch. So new episode watches.
Excellent. So same for me. I actually hadn't really heard of Don't Deliver Us from Evil. I had heard of Alucarda for many, many, many years. There's no reason why I didn't watch it. It seemed like it was right up my alley, but I've heard about it for such a long time. And yeah, Grimm magazine, I read an article about satanic feminism represented in Alucarda. I was like, okay, I need to get down and watch this movie. Side note, it's on YouTube for free. So if you really want to watch the movie, there it is. So nice. It's out there. It's easy access. Exactly. So Jess, what did you like about these two films?
So what I liked about these two films, okay, so I'll go Alucarda. What I liked about it is that it is a very succinct film. Like I said, it is an hour and 12 minutes. It tells its story in a nice, good pace, and I love that. It is dark, and there's so much room for interpretation and symbolism. Like, I will probably go back and watch Alucarda again and talk about more of the different elements that come up from it. And that's what I really enjoyed about it, and the relationship between the two women. Like, there's just so much going on. Loved it. Deliver Us from Evil. I didn't love this film, and I can say that for other reasons when we get to our dislikes, but I really love the final scene of this movie. And I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but for a film that is kind of slow paced and just kind of like bouncing along, it is really intense at the end. And for me, it felt like true horror at the moment. So I didn't dislike this film, but there were elements of it I wasn't a huge fan of.
That's fair. Okay, so for me, Alucarda, holy shit, it is grim as fuck. Like it's more blood soaked than I even thought it could be.
Yes.
It's really dark. It's fast paced. I like that runtime. I don't have a lot of patience for long movies. I love the aesthetics of it. The psychedelic score, which was very surprising, but it's from the 70s. So yeah, let's throw that into this grim movie.
Psychedelic music all the way.
Especially when it comes down to like the forest ritual, that music, like the score is so wonderful and weird. The imagery is fantastic. The super grim church that has about 1 billion crucifixes all over the wall. Like, it is suffocating in there.
Yeah.
It's very oppressive feeling in there. Like, I can imagine why all these people are afraid. All these women are afraid. Sometimes it kind of had like this fantastical fun element to it, which I liked a lot. So I ended up loving Alucarda. So it was such a fun, wonderful movie. And I echo your sentiments on there's a lot going on in that short runtime. It deserves many watches to get everything from it. There's a lot going on. Don't Deliver Us from Evil. I have a hard dislike for the movie, which we'll get into when we talk about our dislike. So in the end, I did not like this movie. So Jess, what are your dislikes?
Well, for Alucarda, the only thing I disliked about this movie, and and I really had a hard time getting it out of my head because it was very disturbing, was the nun garments. The disturbing imagery, like you said, like the church and stuff like that being very oppressive, and like that's really scary to me. And like it was in like a cave and everything. I'm sitting there like, what's supposed to be? I'm like, this church is supposed to be all about God, but I feel it's very evil. Like things don't make sense here. But the nuns' garments really disturbed me throughout it because they are pure white and they're covered their heads, and they look like they are just like splashed in blood all the time. And like as the movie goes on, it gets the blood gets more intense. And I kept like, obviously I'm probably gonna write something about this because like it looks like, they're expelling their menstrual blood half the time, and it's very uncomfortable to watch. And then for Don't Deliver Us from Evil, it is very rapey, which I did not like. I was not a huge fan of that. And the killing of the birds. You and I are, we're both on the same page. The moment you kill a real animal in any kind of horror movie or movie in general, done. I can't. There's no need.
Absolutely. Yeah. Don't Deliver Us from Evil was unexpectedly very rapey. There's content warnings if folks ever want to watch this. There's a lot of sexual assault, predominantly on the same young girl. And it's very disturbing. And I had no idea that, like, when you read about this movie, you don't really hear about that. And I feel like we probably should. For Alucarda, nothing. I kind of liked and disliked the costuming in the sense that I agree with you. The nuns' habits were very disarming. They kind of look like blood-soaked gauze bandages wrapped around them like mummies. It was a very peculiar costume choice. But hello, Alucarda's amazing black dresses through the entire thing. Like old Victorian, but even older, like style dresses. And she was always in black. So that was great. Right. So again, I'm with Jess. If you kill animals for your movie, it's a hard no and a hard don't like you. So they kill 2 birds. I had to look it up while we watch this. I'm like, are they actually killing them? Yes, they do. So again, content warnings if folks watch this. Literally killed 2 beautiful little sweet innocent birds for the movie. So fuck the movie. The end. It was also very slow. But mainly you killed animals. So there's that.
Both, and we're just saying, just both as vegans and very strong about animal rights, we are not in support of that. No. So anyway, but both of these films represent to us some elements of satanic feminism that we felt were important to discuss. And some of them are quite strong in certain areas and some of them not so much. But I know one of the things, as we were talking about, like, Lilith and Eve, the figures of our female protagonists in both these films, in Alucarda, we have Justine and Alucarda, and then we have in Don't Deliver Us from Evil, Laura and Anne. And when Kelly and I were talking about our discussions and stuff like that, we were starting to see, like, we're seeing representations of both these women as Eve and Lilith. We'll go first to Justine. She is a young woman who arrives at the convent after what appears to have experienced some sort of loss in her life, and she looks very innocent, kind of very pure. The way her dresses are always done, they're much lighter, and then she meets Alucarda, this very intense, darkly clad woman who's like instantly like, I'm in love with you. I want to be in love with you right away.
And she talks about death all the time.
All the time.
She's so grim.
And she's like our Lilith figure, right? We get a sense that there is probably some kind of satanic background from her because of the way the movie starts. It's we are assuming it's her mother having been involved in some sort of satanic ritual, and then a child is born from that, and then the child ends up at a convent, and we assume that's Alucarda. And so she already kind of has this kind of like back kind of demonic style origin. But yeah,
absolutely. I had to look up a little bit more about Lilith because, like, Jess has written about this subject matter numerous times. Jess you grew up in like a religious household. That's not my experience. So a lot of this stuff is like actually quite new to me. And like going back to learning about Eve, like when was the last time we talked about Eve? You know what I mean? So I was really curious to learn a little bit more about Lilith. But Jess kind of talked about her a little bit earlier. But yeah, her children were identified as like the incubi, succubi. She was a demoness, children murderer. She was maybe a vampire, a seductress, an ancient femme fatale, as they say. And you absolutely can see this in the Alucarda character. She's very grimdark. She's always in black. She's not afraid of death. No. She talks about death all the time. She's like, you have to die. We all die. But she's drawn to the darkness, and she's very curious. She talks about, like, I found all these secrets. I want these secrets. And she is the one who is the seeker of knowledge between the two, between Justine. Justine's still a little bit like hesitant about things. Like she kind of like follows along with Alucarda in the movie, but you know, she's almost seen more as like the Eve character. She's still a little bit more innocent and everything. But Alucarda is just like this very strong-willed woman. And so when they're playing around in the forest, they meet up with this random dude. And they are represented as gypsies. So I'll say that. They're like people of the woods. And they're like, hey, I've got some things over here. Do you want to check it out? And Alucarda's like, yep, we're going for it. Justine hesitates, which is a very natural reaction. But you have Alucarda's being like, yep, I'm a seeker of knowledge. I want more from this. And they go for it. And I love that.
Yeah, and then what's interesting about the character too about Justine is that she is kind of that Eve figure in the sense that she doesn't know where to follow right away, right? Because she really wants to follow with Alucarda because Alucarda is introducing her to, you know, very natural elements and about, you know, about life and freedom. You know, their hair is always flowy. I always love it whenever I see films with women, you know, who are that show that kind of witchy type archetype, you know, the long flowing hair. And then you have the opposing. There's a nun who has developed feelings, you can tell, of protection over Justine, and she's kind of like the Adam figure. So like Alucarda is kind of our Satan figure, and then the nun who wants to protect Justine is like our Adam figure or a God figure, you know, wanting to make sure that she doesn't stray from the path of, you know, a pure life under as a bride of Christ type thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess we could just get into we're gonna get into the blood ritual. So like you were saying, Justine doesn't really know. She kind of hesitates. She's not really sure, but like she's really into Alucarda because like we're drawn to charming, charismatic, dark figures, right? As you know, that's Satan in a lot of these films, and what we learned about in this book, you know, this dark figure. But also there is some freedom and independence through following that figure. And so even though she's kind of hesitant throughout it, they go and meet up with these people in the woods, and they have what we see as a blood ritual. And you kind of see in both of these movies, Don't Deliver Us from Evil and Alucarda, this like marriage of blood and like this blood communion, let's call it. For them. But first off, and we even have a clip of this, for Alucarda and Justine doing their, like, I'm going to call it a blood communion, because that's essentially what it is, this ritual of bringing them together.
Exactly. And what's interesting is I brought back to the dichotomy is we'll see the element of someone trying to save Justine's soul. So 1 second, I'll share that for everyone here. Christ.
So you have Alucarda, and she's like that seeker of knowledge and everything. She wants to find out more things. And so she went into the forest, and what did she gain? Satan and independence and power. Because in that very oppressive church in the cave, for whatever reason, you know, it's all about like, do as you're told via God. You're going to burn in hell. Seek nothing else. God is all wise. God is wisdom. Satan will get you and he'll harm you. But what does Justine and Alucarda really get from that convent? Oppression, right? Mm-hmm. And we see that as well in Don't Deliver Us from Evil with Lore and Eve. They are kind of spicy. Sorry, Lore and Anne. I wrote down Eve. Wow. Freudian slip there. Lore and Anne. They're even younger girls, and they're very mischievous. They kind of take kind of to like the next level, this really dark place. But they're young, pious, virginal, quote unquote, virginal women in these convent type environments. For the girls, it's like a very religious kind of like private school. Then for Alucarda and Justine, it's an actual convent.
Orphanage, like convent orphanage, yeah.
Absolutely. And these movies have a lot of things in common. And I feel like we went into this blind and then they were perfect matches for each other. Because the other thing that they have hugely in common, which is hugely controversial, blasphemous, and deviant, is that both these movies are very gay. These women are very queer, and it's amazing to see, but they're all lesbians. There's nuns that are lesbians and Don't Deliver Us from Evil, but they do have that kind of combination, and lesbians are, dark and evil and inverts and everything when it comes to the eyes of like priests and nuns and God, and like, you cannot be homosexual. That is something that is very transgressive, that's linked to Satan. You're highly sexually promiscuous and they're supposed to be frightening. You're demonic, and it's very oppressive. Again, so these young girls are in these highly oppressive environments seeking connection, and they find it in other women.
They do. They find it in each other, both with Justine and Alucarda end up making a death pact together to remain together. And it's the same with Laura and Anne. They also make a pact to remain together, and nothing would ever separate them. And then they're surrounded by all kinds of other women, but they're not necessarily seeing a very positive representation of women. They're seeing a very repressed representation of women. Even in the scene when in Don't Deliver Us from Evil, Anne spies on two of the nuns, and she witnesses a scene of affection, of intimacy between two of the nuns, and she goes to the priest to say, this is what I saw, and she's conflicted. She doesn't know if this was right or wrong, but the priest is like, well, what you saw is inappropriate in the eyes of God. And, and she's kind of confused, and this is why we will see later why she ends up making the decision to turn to Satan, because she knows that in Satan her love is seen as valid, her affections are seen as valid, because as early as the 19th century, a lot of texts on lesbianism were often produced by men, and often in fields of medicine, journalism, and criminology, and then also in prose, so poets and stories. It's interesting, in the more medical and journalistic and criminology fields, it was often written in a very negative way, seen as vice that needed to be curbed, and there was a lot of very negative attitudes, whereas in fiction and poetry, it ends up being related a lot to Satanism. And what's really interesting when we were reading in our book on Satanic Feminism was how often when homosexuality was attacked, it was often related to Satan, and people would blame, everyone knows of Sappho, for having devised a method for women to get off without men, for women to empower themselves and not have to be reliant upon men for their own sexual gratifications or pleasures, right? And by the end of the 19th century, particularly in Great Britain, for some reason, homosexuality was regarded as satanic, and we all understand that. We've experienced that. I've experienced, my own coming out as a bisexual woman and being called demonic, and being tempted away by Satan. That's a whole other story, and I think I've talked about this before. But many of these stereotypes came from Western countries, stating that lesbianism was demonized, and it was often connected back to religion. And it's because we read lesbianism, and often lesbianism and religion would be connected. And this came from an idea of Denis Diderot's La Religieux, the nun, which talks about a lot of the homosexual relations between nuns, which we see present in both the films, not as overtly in Alucarda, but it is, because of the way the nun has this extreme fixation on Justine and saving her soul and thus her body, right? And so it was often a very strong critique against lesbianism. Often it was related to satanic imagery and in a purpose to make it look bad, to make it look wrong. But in other aspects, you know, when we're watching these films, it is seen as liberating, it's freedom, it is it's acceptance, it is allowing who they want to be with, regardless of, you know, gender.
Absolutely. And the one thing that Alucarda has that Don't Deliver Us from Evil has is possession, or at least claimed possession. So early on, again, 1800s, medical professionals thought of lesbianism as a degenerate disease. It's hereditary. It's a medical cause. It's a problem. And also could be a cause of possession. Mm-hmm. You must be possessed by the devil. And that's why you're like all, you know, sexually, you know, excessive, and you want to fornicate with women. You want to fornicate with Satan too. But you claim that these women are possessed, and that removes all agency from these women. Mm-hmm. And we see that with these characters.
Well, we see that in Alucarda for sure.
Absolutely. And all of these young women are demonized, but they've taken that demonization and they've subverted it and turned it into a source of power and agency. And this unsettles our priests and our nuns and our, essentially anti-feminine Christian symbolism. And in Alucarda, they think that they're possessed, and that just takes all elements of what's natural and fine and okay and good with these young women away from them. And what I like, and we'll go to Don't Deliver Us from Evil, is another kind of like blood communion, a blood union, but truly they have a satanic marriage. And we have a clip of that as well.
Yeah, so to kind of build some context around this clip, throughout the movie of Don't Deliver Us from Evil, we have seen scenes of Anne and Laure taking things from the church. You know, they're taking the Holy Communion, they're taking garments and stuff like that in preparation for this marriage.
You know, even though I don't like the movie, some scenes like that one particularly are so good. And it's so strong within our concept of satanic feminism. Just like you said, Jess, you know, in the eyes of God and in this very narrow-minded view of the religion that they follow or they have to follow because they're young girls, what they're doing is so blasphemous. So blasphemous, and I just like cheer for them. I love it.
My old Catholic background was like watching those scenes when they're like taking the host, and I'm like explaining it to you. I'm like, oh my gosh, you didn't ingest the host. That is blasphemy.
And I was like, what's the host?
My old religious background being like coming in like, oh, this is all very symbolic. What's happening here? You know, because they're breaking that bond, or that forced upon bond with the church, to be who they want to be themselves. And so they think by doing what they're doing, they are giving kind of like the biggest middle finger to God by saying, I'm going to ally with Satan now, because who I am as a woman, who I am as an individual, and my feelings for my partner here, for Laure and Anne, this is true. And I know because, and we see how when Anne has that conversation with the priest about what she saw, this confliction, and she's conflicted. Even throughout the rest of the movie, she's conflicted. There's times where she cries and she feels bad for what she's done, but I'm like, you're in love. You're in love with a woman, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. And I remember after watching that film, remembering thinking of Heavenly Creatures and being like, oh yes, this is kind of very symbolism of this.
Well, I think we are good to move on to our next figure.
Oh, for sure.
Let's do it. So that's our demon woman, our succubus, and the movie is Jennifer's Body. So what was your experience, Jess? I think you were one of those late to the gamers.
I was definitely one of those late to the gamers. I remember when Jennifer's Body was first came out and saw like the previews and stuff like that. I remember being like, I'm not going to watch that movie. Once again, it's a horror genre, you know. objectifying Megan Fox and stuff like that, you know, and I was very naive. I didn't know what I know now. So I was very late to the game. And then I picked up my own copy of it a couple of years ago because I heard so much about it and had people talking about how it was having a renaissance and having a very positive interpretation of it. And I've watched it, and I am definitely a huge fan of Jennifer's Body. I've written about this piece in the last issue of Grim Magazine, number 7, Teenage Wasteland, and about everything it represents in this film.
For me, I actually watched Jennifer's Body around the time that it came out. Not like I saw it in theaters, but probably a year or two later. So I was one of those people that saw it in the beginning and enjoyed it from the beginning. It's a movie that is exactly my type of thing. Like, it's my cup of tea, let's say. So I'm really, really glad. I'm one of those people that's really glad that it's kind of had this like resurgence and people are discovering it and seeing how wonderful and fun it really is. And I adore this movie. Adore it.
So what do you like so much about it then?
Oof, I love the dialogue so much. It's just so like good. So witty and well written. I love it. And it kind of brings me back to the old days of Buffy, honestly. Just like they created their own language on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And this is like its own thing altogether. Like, Megan Fox was so brilliant in this movie. I loved her in this. I know she's been in a bunch of other things, usually not horror, so I haven't really seen them. Sorry. I watch so much horror. Anyways, so I thought she was great. I love the premise of it. I love how openly they kind of talk about sex and sexual activities. You know, they talk about the power of female sexuality early in the film, that our boobs are super powerful. Like, Jennifer grabs onto Needy and is like, do you know how powerful these things are? And I'm like, yes, they are. They are. And that's okay to know that. And it's okay to own that. And I just love that kind of feeling in the movie. I'm a sucker for teenage girl horror. I love it. I also love a good slow motion walk down a high school hallway. The Craft, Jawbreaker, Ginger Snaps. There's many of them. All cheerleaders die. Like, I love it so much. And the last thing I'll say that I really like is the Hole reference, Hole, the band from the 90s, folks. And the song at the end, it ends with a Hole song. And it's just like this whole movie is a whole mood and vibe for me that I love so much. How about you?
Well, you've said a lot of what I enjoy as well. Like I said, the dialogue is very quotable. It's very memorable scenes. I love the actress Amanda Seyfried. I have seen so much of different things of her in it. She's just so great. And I've revisited this film. And I remember when a couple times I revisited this film and everyone talks so much about the image of Jennifer and what she represents, stuff like that. But my last time I talked about this film, I went in and talked about Needy and how much of a great character she really is and how much she grows as a woman throughout the entirety of the film. And I just love the relationship between the two women, how both it's simple and complex at the same time too. And that it's just everything. And I also love the mythology around the succubus. Like, I just think it's so cool when things get show about different succubus and stuff like that and how we can broach that topic.
Absolutely. Do you have any dislikes?
I'm pretty sure our dislikes are the same, but I dislike the band Low Shoulder and that song Through the Trees.
Oh my God.
And Chip. I have a tofu with Chip. And his gaslighting of Needy all the time.
Yeah, my only dislike is Low Shoulder, but I feel like that is how I'm supposed to feel because they wrote it in such a perfect way to be like, they are the actual villains of this entire film and they are disgusting. And they make my skin crawl. I hate their music and I pretty much hate everything about them. And again, I think I'm supposed to, so they did a good job.
But no, they definitely did a great job making us cheer for Jennifer and Needy. Well, and cry a little. It's sad at the end.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's quite the story. So getting into our demon woman, our succubus, and this, the concept's been around for centuries. Artists, performers, independent women, they took on this mysterious persona of our demon woman.
In the demon woman, like, and so what a succubus is, and many people should know, but if you don't, it is a female demon who often takes the form of a human woman in order to seduce men, and usually through is usually done through sexual intercourse. Sometimes a succubus may appear in your dreams. She is often depicted as very attractive, and they're generally very frightening and very demonic. So when a succubus is done with you, she'll probably eat you because she's done with you. Succubus are also known as Lilith. So this is where this connection with Lilith comes in, and in the Sumerian Belial, and they tend to draw energy from men to sustain themselves. So usually they do it to the point of exhaustion or death for the victim. So usually their victims die, either if they've eaten them or just taken all the energy out of them.
Absolutely. And so I think out of like all the figures that we talk about today and that we research, this is the one that kind of stands out the most to me, and on maybe in a more personal way, like the figure of Lilith, the demon woman, the succubus. So again, great book if you're at all interested in any of these ideologies, or at least the symbolism behind all of this is so good. Mm-hmm. So like embracing demons, as we see in this film, like satanic serpent motifs, which you've seen in old turn of the century demon women, or women that took on the persona of the demonic, is really another, we'll say, middle finger or whatever to criticizing conservative Christian values and rejecting them, again, on a symbolic level. So much of this is about the symbolism of these women, of these characters. And so demonism is one of the ways that registers about on the symbolic resistance that is available for rebellious women. So they bring on this demonic persona. They use Satan and the demonic as markers of our female rebellion. There's supernatural elements to it, the occult femme fatale. It's empowering, it's subversive. And I really see this in Jennifer's body. And like she already is like a powerful young woman in her high school. She's absolutely beautiful. She's very flirty. She's got that voice that like men would be really drawn to, like the very like light and quote feminine. She wears this like pink and hearts and stars. And like, even though that's not a look that I generally like, I love that she has like this, well, she's this succubus demonic woman, but she looks like that. She, again, that slow motion walk down the hallway, she's where everything's like bright pink, this like bubblegum pop princess of a high school, but she will eat your soul and shit it out. And I love that. So you can take this like transgressive woman, this transgressive idea of the demonic woman, the demon woman, the succubus, but you also can retain some of our quote traditional feminine traits and virtues in our styles and keep it, because it still is a complete refusal of a quote from the book, placid domesticity. And the succubus is like the men's worst fears of feminists as quote vengeful castrating harpies, and that is Jennifer and Jennifer's body. I love it.
Well, especially because like the way the film starts, like she's not the, like we know she gets like turned into the demon, but like you said in the beginning of the film, she is confident in herself and
she's already there. Yep.
You know, exactly. She's already there. Like some people would argue, be like, oh, she's pushing too much to overcome something or to maybe hide some self-esteem issues. But I'm like, no, Jennifer's confident. She knows herself. And she's very, you know, even though she's kind of hard on Needy, she's very protective of her. But when we see her, and I love how when Low Shoulder's like, oh, you know, we're going to sacrifice the virgin so we become famous. And it backfires on them and she turns into this man-eating succubus. And she is essentially out for revenge. Like she's not just like, whereas Needy is concerned about, you know, the people who are in danger because of what Jennifer is doing. At the end, when Needy ends up becoming a succubus herself, you know, she uses that same power and that same feral femininity to take back revenge and to right the wrong that had been done to her friend. Her friend had been kind of, you know, well, she was murdered without consent, essentially. Well, no, 100%. Sorry, that seems so random.
Yeah.
But from the start, Jennifer is our Lilith figure from the very beginning to the moment of the satanic ritual to when she comes back and she's demonized and she's literally a man-eating succubus. She enacts revenge on the weak-willed men, just as Lilith was said to do, and that's how she maintains her strength and her beauty and her supernatural powers.
Absolutely. And we have a wonderful clip of Jennifer killing a young boy.
You made it.
This isn't really your house, is it?
No, baby. This is our house. Just for you and me. We can play mommy and daddy.
No way.
I need you frightened. I need you hopeless.
Woo.
Yeah.
So I really feel like Jennifer was never an Eve. She was born a true Lilith figure. And then when she becomes the succubus, like that just elevates her. That just brings her up a notch to just become this strong, extra free woman. And I love it particularly in that scene and throughout the whole movie. And we also see it throughout all of these movies that you wouldn't go as a female identifying person. You would not go to some strange abandoned house to meet a man.
No.
Unfortunately. And so what we have in here is Jennifer subverting those kind of like tropes in horror movies as well, where the woman's always the victim. And even though I guess technically she kind of was at one point, but yeah, it backfires and she gets revenge. And we don't often get that in movies. And so I really, really love that she becomes this figure that is kind of destroying the patriarchy one young boy at a time. And I love that. And so she's kind of like this satanic, demonic, independent, fiercely independent woman. And this is what is going to resonate with women. We like to see these kind of figures, these kind of archetypes. And I know for myself, this kind of archetype really stands out to me.
Well, and particularly like the concept of the demonic woman, as addresses typically the motif of actively assuming roles that are outside the standard role in which a woman is supposed to be portrayed. Like women who, they embrace like, the various different satanic serpent motifs, because it allows an opportunity of rebellion when women take on these kind of like demonic personas. These demonic personas are not necessarily like, actually being a demon and eating people. Sometimes it's literally just flirting with satanic imagery to use in terms of sense of like a language of resistance. We've had a lot of famous people in the past, like Theta Bear, Lucia Casita, and Sarah Bearhart, who are all women who they broke the gender norms by transgressing boundaries, by discarding the notions of what is appropriate for women. And typically women are demonized whenever we fall outside the idea of what's appropriate for us. If we become self-employed, that's not right. If we participated in male activities, especially back in the day, if you wore pants.
I was going to say, if you wore pants.
You wear pants.
Demon.
You're transgressing a boundary. And so while some of these women are, and not necessarily all these women are directly feminist, but they're using transgressive behavior that are being role models. So they're breaking the idea of being not the angel of the household. And this is what many people love. And this is why like an actress like Theta Bear was very famous among her fans, because they love the fact that she had these on-screen personas that were all about undoing men in devilish ways, which is exactly what we see Jennifer and Jennifer's body. And we also kind of see the same way for Needy. And I'm like a huge proponent for the character of Needy in the film, because she's a woman who grows so much from being like trying to fit within the norm, trying to follow what's appropriate for him. But then when she sees what's going on and no one is listening to her, and she's being gaslit by her boyfriend, stuff like that. And then she's like, I'm going to take things into my own hands. And when then she realizes that she becomes a demon herself, and she gets out and she goes after the little shoulder, I'm just like, yes. Because not only that, she's not, what she did was not because she's mad at Jennifer in any way. She's mad because of what happened to her friend, someone she loved a lot. And that's one of the things that Jennifer's body flirts with is lesbianism in the film. This unique relationship between these two women who love and care for each other a lot, like a sisterhood. And when her sister, that she ended up having to, I hate to say it, it's so harsh, but eliminate, because she was, you know, not controlling her abilities, and she was kind of just going a little wild with it. And Needy's like, no, you're going to hurt yourself. You're going to hurt others. You know, I need to stop this. So she goes after a Low Shoulder, because of them, she lost her best friend. She lost someone who she cared about deeply. And she had to take on the persona of the demon to seek out revenge.
Absolutely. And a big thing that will help transition us into talking about our final film, The Witch, is the representation and aspect of femininity, womanhood, and nature. The wild and untamed nature. So the demon woman, to me, is not only connected with nature, and you see it each time that Jennifer kind of goes into full kind of succubus mode and kills in the woods with a football guy. All the animals come around them in the scene with the boy in the house. Rats are all of a sudden around. And at the end of the film, they're in this like underground pool, and it's overgrown with nature and weeds and vines and plants. So for me, the demon woman is not only connected with nature, but she actually is one with it. Historical demon women in art and literature were fascinated and surrounded by nature, animals, either in their clothing and their pets or both. And after, in such a beautiful, wonderful scene in the movie, Jennifer kills that football player and then takes a dip in the lake. Mm-hmm. And I love that it's so serene and she's amongst nature. So for me, how I see it is she's shedding her feminine destiny of passive suffering and becoming the demonic feminine. I love it.
I love it. That is once again another theme we see throughout already 3 of these films we discussed with, you know, Alucarda, Don't Deliver Us From Evil. Don't Deliver Us From Evil. Those women are outside all the time. They're frolicking among the trees and playing in the water. It was the same in Alucarda, Justina Alucarda, out and among woods, the wild woods and trees. Same in Jennifer's body, out among nature. And this is where often women have been told where evil lies. It is in the woods. You know, stay out of the woods. You will become possessed. You know, dangerous things happen in the woods, because women, we are naturally earthly figures, and what's connected to the earth and what is often portrayed as not of being of earthly pleasures, Satan. And you cannot, you know, so this is where once again women and Satan become these natural allies, because we're of earthly elements.
Exactly. We have one final clip before we move on to The Witch, and it's one of my favorite moments of Jennifer's body.
I gotta go. I am a god.
Love it. Love it. Because we're at the 1 hour mark. We've got one movie left, and we saved almost the best for last.
Saving the best for last.
Now we're going to talk about the movie The Witch and the figure of the witch. So I already know Jess's story. I showed this movie to you. I was there.
Yes, you were there.
So I showed this movie to Jess because as soon as I saw it, I knew immediately that she would love it. Yep. And I saw it around the time it came out. My partner at the time probably downloaded it. It's terrible. Arrest me. So I saw it around the time that it came out, and I absolutely fell in love with this movie. And I actually love it more and more each time I watch it. Yeah. So that's pretty much that story.
Yeah, and like I said, Kelly pretty much said, she showed it to me. I loved it right away. And I love this film. I've talked about it in other podcasts. I've written about it for Grim Magazine, like in my article. I love how it blends the history of folklore and witches and womanhood all together. It's just a very empowering film, and I watch it so many times a year, and every time I watch it, I see something new.
Absolutely. So yeah, generally give me some of your favorite aspects of it. What are your favorite likes?
My favorite likes? I love everything about this film. I love the character Thomason. I love the folkloric images of the witch. I love how it's got like historical elements to it. Like I will make this very quick. I love this film. There's nothing I dislike about it except the twins.
It's because they're children. Nobody likes kids, man. They're just always so weird and annoying and evil and spooky. So for me, I as well. I love the premise. I love the score. It's one of my all-time favorite horror movie scores. I love all the wide shots of the woods, the blending of fantasy with folklore and horror. It feels very old at times, but then it also feels very modern at times too, somehow. It's like this weird, interesting blend in the movie. My dislike of it, but I like and dislike, is I love the fact that they used real like old Jacobean language, but it makes you have to turn on the subtitles sometimes to actually understand what they're saying. And when I first watched it, I barely understood a thing of what they were saying, but like I could like pick up on body language and tone and everything that was happening. So it's hard to get past. I can understand why some people don't like that or appreciate it, but I love authenticity in films. So like if you're set in Norway, you have Norwegians and you speak Norwegian. If you're going to be set in this Puritan time, speak the language that they would speak. And I love that. So yeah, it's like a like and dislike, but generally I don't actually dislike anything about this movie. So it's so fantastic. Yeah. So getting into our historical figure, our sinister rebel, we did an entire episode on witches and female empowerment. That is episode 4 of our podcast. So this is just a scratching the surface. I'll say that again of all of this, but definitely witches. So listen to that episode for a full overview of this. But witches, the archetype of the witch has been around for such a long time, hundreds and hundreds of years. It's been used negatively against strong, free-thinking women. And after years and years of being marginalized and demonized, people like women have finally started to kind of embrace it as more of a figure of positivity, reclaiming that, right? Mm-hmm. And regularly, especially, you know, during the witch trials and everything, and in film for such a long time, the witch isn't shown as the healer as she once was, but she's this fearsome kind of like crone and hag figure with terrifying powers. She's monstrous, evil, non-human, non-feminine, because she's kind of anti-motherhood. And you can see this in the witch. You know, and women were branded as witches because they were ones that maybe were overtly passionate, they're wanton, they're unpredictable, they were lusty, again, they were weak, and therefore easily recruited into Satan's cult.
Well, exactly. And this is why we get a lot of early French historians like Jules Michelet, who wrote La Sorcière, who was very anti-clerical, and he ended up celebrating the witch as both a Satanist and a feminist, but as an ally to Satan, in that he worked, that the witches work with Satan as a way to counteract the work of, the church, the misogynistic, patriarchal aspects of it. And the witch is often connected to Satan, which is thus connected to nature and bringing about all that is good into the world, right? You know, Satan brought about he claimed that Satan brought about the Renaissance and science and all that was good for man that was still condemned by the church. And the woman, the witch herself, she is Satan's chosen one. She nurtures science, she nurtures nature. Women share among each other medicinal solutions and work together as midwives to help each other during childbirth and often to help relieve pain. And this is why a lot of midwives would be accused of witches, because they would bring about this they would say secret knowledge to helping relieve women of pain during childbirth, which is seen as a no-no, because that is our punishment for having eaten the fruit. Just the witch, she is a rebel. She protests against the social injustices pushed upon women and taking back power of a woman's body and allowing ourselves to be connected to our natural elements, and we can do that through Satan. And we see this in a lot of the imagery of the witch, in the film The Witch, and a lot of this revolutionary imagery, and this often these women being used to I'm kind of going off on that.
Well, we can get into talking about the Puritans, because that's specifically what The Witch is about. So puritanical views of witches were a little bit more subdued compared to the European views. It's less obsessed with the vulgarity and obscenities of witchcraft over in medieval Europe. So the concept and idea of fornication with Satan by Thomason in this film is actually quite scandalous in nature. It's very powerfully rebellious. The Puritans of New England rejected the idea that women were inherently sinful, but they still thought of Eve's lapse as a failure to subordinate herself to a male authority. So like we said earlier, Eve's daughters inherited her vulnerability to, quote, temptations, which involved a defiance of our patriarchal order, and that order was essential to maintain. And we see this in The Witch with Thomason's relationship with her father, William. Mm-hmm. And The Witch, we kind of look at the Eve connection, we'll call it, keep going with that. But what I love in this film, and it shows me, about the idea of satanic feminism. So the beginning of the film, there's many, many shots of Thomason in this film, like central shots of her praying, looking like pleadingly at her father and at the male figures in the film, praying to God for mercy and to light. And in the end, God does not do anything for her. And in the end, Satan's offering her everything. Satan actually provides her this light and this independence, which I really, really love. And on this watch, I saw all of those shots. They're very clear shots throughout the film. And then it ends with the final shot, again, a centered shot of her smiling for the first time, laughing, joyous. And it's so fantastic. Fantastic.
Actually experiencing some form of pure joy or a fear of empowerment too, because throughout the entire film, Thomason is empowered. As much as she tries, she's always being put down by her father. Her father's always like, don't say anything, don't upset your mother. And that was always the big thing, is the dichotomy of the relationship between Catherine and Thomason, because Catherine is very hard on Thomason, quick to accuse her of potentially seducing her brother and her father, by allowing, her silver cup to be stolen, for allowing the baby to be kidnapped, for all the most horrible things. Her mother is so quick to demonize Thomason and to accuse her of being a witch because she just wants her out. And that, once again, is kind of to me, a representation of that whole separation between women, and how women would often demonize each other and accuse each other of being witches to protect themselves, and to relieve them of the thoughts that they were having, or for them to feel bad, particularly in a religious setting. Catherine really struggles with her religious beliefs throughout the entirety of the film. And so she would rather blame her discomfort and her own questioning of her own religious beliefs on the fact that her daughter is a witch and is doing all these supernatural things and is causing this pain in her family. She doesn't want to take responsibility for herself, because once again, that's something that is very prevalent in a lot of, I've seen and experienced in a lot of kind of religious organizations, is the lack of ability to take accountability for one's actions. Whereas typically I find in a lot of witches films and with Satanism, stuff like that, is we hold ourselves accountable for what we do. If we do horrible things, we admit to it, and we say yes. And this is where the witch can stand up and be an image of dissident, and as well as political power and empowerment for women. Because at the same time too, it is empowering for a woman to stand up for herself and say, yes, I did not do something that was great, and I apologize for that. And that, but there's power in that, instead of shooing off to someone else, being like, oh, no, I didn't, and, disempowering yourselves. And that's what happens in The Witch, at the end, where Thomason finally does embrace what has been accused of her the entirety of the film.
Absolutely. And I keep saying absolutely, sorry, it's anything. But when we watched it, Jess, you brought up this really interesting motif that we see, and it's about apples. Yes. And I loved that, and I sat and just thought about it for a while. So folks, in The Witch, there's that reoccurring apple kind of idea, and it's touched on throughout the film. And of course, the apple is this symbol of Eve's transgression. Mm-hmm. And later on in the film, when you see Caleb and his kind of possessed like mesmerized by the witch state, he vomits up or like is choking and vomits up an apple. And I was thinking about that and like about the film and the witch as an archetype and feminism and satanic feminism and everything. And what came to my mind was kind of like the witch, like essentially shoving the symbol down the throat of the patriarchy, the symbol of our transgression and everything that apparently is wrong with us down the throat of the patriarchy. And that's down a young boy's throat. And that is scandalous. That is transgressive. And that is actually a very, very powerful aspect of this film and talking about this whole imagery.
Which is really interesting. And I keep thinking about that because throughout the entirety of the film, Caleb is questioning. He's questioning his faith. He's questioning what's being told of him, right? And he's asking, and everyone's just being like, you just believe, this is how it is, right? And he's like, well, is my soul going to go to hell too if this happens, right? And he comes back and he talks about like, you know, her sin is upon me. And I love that we watched it in subtitles because you can hear all that Jacobean language. But when he, brings out that apple, he's been given knowledge. Like the witch is literally giving him knowledge for him, to make a choice, and he's regurgitates it out because he's like, he'd rather not have that knowledge and die knowing that he is not of sin, right? So that he can go to heaven.
Yeah.
Such a powerful scene. I remember that scene always disturbing me. And,
me too.
Like, yeah.
I have always found, as a side note, I've always found the like deeply, deeply religious people like that, and like that little boy I feel like is the most like deeply faithful than all of these all these characters are. I find them terrifying, this like unshakable terrifying faith that they have for themselves. I find terrifying. But so let's look at because we're near our time here, wrapping up with regards to Black Phillip. He's obviously our symbol of Satan, and we do see the actual form of Satan later on in the film. But it's interesting because Thomasin is actually never harmed by the witch, by Black Phillip or Satan, but she is offered freedom, independence, and a life of her own. She's unbound by the bondage of religion, puritanism, patriarchal rule. And this film is really wonderful because it actually talks to whom the real monsters are in this entire story: patriarchy, religion, puritanism, God. And it really, like, it shows Thomasin emerging from literally her tightly bound shell into true wild feminine abandon. And it's so brilliant to watch and so beautiful to watch. It like gives me chills every time. I love it.
That whole scene between Thomasin and Black Phillip, and when we watched it again for this in preparation of this, we both like have seen this movie so many times, but I always saw the image of Black Phillip. We only just saw like his lower half, but then we actually see his face in the shadows, and that is so much in a prominent moment because of what he's asking her. He's giving her knowledge, just as he did with Eve.
Yep.
He is saying, "Would you like knowledge? Would you like to have your eyes open?"
Yeah.
They lied to you. They're trying to keep you controlled. They want to sell you out. They want to sell you away to, but I'm giving you a promise to give you something. I'm giving you empowerment. I'm giving you a freedom of choice. And this is how I can help you.
Yeah. So do you want to show the Black Phillip speaks or just the final clip?
Let's do Black Phillip speaks.
Okay.
What dost thou want?
What canst thou give?
Wouldst thou like the taste of butter? A pretty dress? Wouldst thou like to live deliciously?
Yes.
Wouldst thou like to see the world?
What will you from me?
Dost thou see a book before thee? Remove thy shift.
I cannot write my name.
I will guide
if we start wrapping up now, we'll have time for a Q&A, I believe. So should we get into Spinster's final thoughts?
Let's get into Spinster's final thoughts.
Okay. Well, before we round off this episode with our usual Spinster final thoughts, we wanted to extend a huge thank you to our sponsor of the podcast, Brutalities. So as Spinsters, as Jess just took a sip of tea, as Spinsters, we obviously adore tea. So we really love sitting down with a horror movie and drinking a hot mug of tea. So if you're interested in getting some tea from Brutalities, it's really excellent tea, by the way, please use the code SPINSTER15 to get 15% off your order. For our Canadian listeners, please reach out to the company for shipping prices.
And now for my final thoughts. To me, okay. I'm on this roll about the witch and how she is a revolutionary, but at the end of the day, we watched all these women, the succubus, the transgressive woman, and the witch. They are all elements of satanic feminism in the sense that they are all fighting against the church and the social hierarchies that are created that supported the upper class, but oppressed the poor and then oppressed the people and oppressed everyone else in life. And this is what satanic feminism is about: liberation, is about liberating women. And so reading this was really interesting to me because I grew up in a Roman Catholic household and I was educated to fear Satan. And I remember sitting in a church, listening to sermons and imagining what hell was like and thinking about this infernal ruler, like presiding over these sinners and being terrified and that the devil was everywhere. And if I deviated from this Christian path, I was in trouble. So it was a funny thing, though, is that as I learned from my religious upbringing, I actually learned a lot about the story of Lucifer and his fall from heaven. And I started doing more research and learning about Lilith and about this different aspects of Satan, Lucifer, and the devil, and how he's a very complex being. And and what I had always known as the Catholic interpretation of Satan was literally so simplistic of just creating a boogeyman to keep followers in line and under control. So as I began to learn about religious cultures and different interpretations of the devil and how something that doesn't happen to be part of the Christian message often gets chalked up to the work of the devil. And I've learned and also witnessed as well as experienced how superstitious belief can hurt people and damage lives. So when I started to see Satan not as a bad guy, I was supposed to believe this being as being something else, something that humanity needed, a symbolic dual nature that keeps life in balance with our checks and balances. So when I learned about satanic feminism and how progressive it was and how it belongs to these people like myself, the outsiders, people on the fringes of society, I just learned that Christianity was really tending to just be more of a stumbling block for the individual and for our collective liberties. And this is why seeing Satan as an ally is kind of like important and kind of really interesting, because he is the rebellious one who questioned the absolute authority of God and challenged him by allowing the angels to have a concept of free will and choice. So Satan is about liberty, free will, and choice. And the witch's alignment with Satan, women's alignment with Satan, is about reframing that to show the strength of female power and the refusal to accept the negative symbolism that the church has used since the time of Eve to highlight the supposed bad aspects of womanhood. The lesbian, the demonic women, the witch, they are the new rebels. They work with Satan to oppose historical oppression of the church and the societal norms that are extremely misogynistic and discriminating to anyone deemed as other. Satanism, satanic feminism, is a language of political resistance, and while it may not speak to some, it does for others, and it should be recognized as well as respected.
Hail Satan! As an atheist with zero spiritual beliefs, I have come to realize how much power exists in symbols. This is what satanic feminism is all about. It's about finding power in the symbol of Satan and our witch, Eve, Lilith, and succubus. It's about subverting century-old beliefs into modernized revisions where women can feel empowered. Satanic feminism is the alternative to patriarchal Christianity. Satanic women have agency, and with that agency comes self-worth. Though many women are villainized in these films, even in the ones that we watched and talked about today, they can still be symbols of strength for women. The witch, the most recognizable symbol of independence and freedom. The witch is fierce and can't be controlled, contained, or dominated. Thomason isn't afraid of the carnal, wild feminine, but entranced by it. Her Christ-like pose is emblematic of the death and rebirth of her as a witch. The demon woman. She is an agent of chaos in a man's world. All fear her beauty, charm, and mystery. Jennifer is a god. Eve and Lilith. The church and hegemonic readings of the Bible have prevented the emancipation of women for years. Eve and Lilith use satanic pride to break the chains of conformity to become liberated women of wild feminine abandon. So when I started my final thoughts, I said, "Hail Satan." Through our analysis and discussion, I can understand the reasoning behind this controversial, highly blasphemous statement. But, and again, we really just scratched the surface on this topic of satanic feminism. But my final words to all those that are listening, especially to all those that have been oppressed for centuries. In Book 2 of Paradise Lost, Satan says to the fallen angels, "Awake, arise, or be forever fallen." So really, hail thyself.
And that ends our episode on satanic feminism. We want to thank Dance with the Dead for our intro and outro music, Robies, and for Brandon for all of the work on our promotional materials, and also to everyone who listens to us and support us. And we want to remind you to follow us on our website, spinstersofhorror.com, Facebook, Spinsters of Horror, and our Facebook Coven group, Spinsters of Horror Coven.
We are also on Twitter at Horror Spinsters. We are on Instagram at Spinsters of Horror. As well, please rate and review us on iTunes so we can get the show out to more listeners, but also on SoundCloud, Stitcher, and any other podcasting app you listen to us on. We do have merch, so please go to TeePublic and look up Spinsters of Horror to purchase our t-shirts and buy stickers from the shop and donate. We do have a donation button, folks, so if you like what we do, you're welcome to press that button. But folks, until then, please remember,
the future of fear is female. And that is it. And we have time for some Q&A, some questions.
Hey guys, thank you. Great. Yeah, we might have time for one or two more questions. So, keep them coming. Thank you for your talk, and those are excellent film recommendations, or film choices, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah, but first I do want to make a note here that when you spoke about Alucarda, you did actually use a racial slur for the G word. So we do want to also call attention to that. And also there is a question that's kind of tied to that. It's more of a general question, but I think, I'd be interested to hear what you say. The person wonders, how much awareness and critique of the stereotypical trope of Romani women as evil is present in the feminist horror community and the horror community in general, but specifically the feminist horror community.
I'll start with about the G word. Do you mean gypsy? I'm sorry to say it again, but like I said, it was like the folks in the movie are, quote, represented as. So I'm sorry if that was offensive to anyone. I feel like that's kind of how, unfortunately, the movie represents the folks that live out there. Yeah,
I guess
so,
like the air quotes maybe were missing, so we weren't aware.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
No, definitely not appropriate. And I definitely feel that it is time in all films to retire that trope. That is just not something that needs to be discussed about anymore. And I'm just tired of just showing all people of any belief or anything that's evil. I'm tired of that, right? It's okay, very
great. Yeah, I just wanted to discuss that. Let's see. Okay, and so people can also come together, right? If they want to continue with the Q&A. Yeah. So maybe you can talk about why you chose these 4 films. I mean, they're very representative, but are there other films that maybe you were thinking of including that you didn't?
Well, we had like a whole list of other films that we were thinking of including, and we really wanted to narrow it down. We wanted to get some that was directed by a woman, which was definitely by Jennifer's Body, because another thing that's really kind of a disappointing thing, and something that is an area that could be worked on, is that not a lot of these films that were representing satanic feminism or women or witches in general are done by women. It's very heavily dominated by men doing these films. And we had other films that came up, like All the Colors of the Dark, The Mephisto Waltz. We had The Babysitter, Don't Deliver Us from Evil, The Seventh Victim. Like there was just like all, there's a lot of these elements where Satanism often gets represented in some way, shape, or form in these various films. But we really wanted to find the ones that really spoke to these archetypes that we're finding in these books, and are often archetypes that are seen a lot through various horror films. But it would be really nice to see more women approaching these films and approaching this idea of satanic feminism and liberation.
And what I'll say to that is we initially didn't have Jennifer's Body in it. You know how like you start planning things and things kind of like evolve and change. And then once we got more into the book, we're like, oh, these 3 main figures, like the succubus, the witch, and Eve and Lilith and whatnot. So let's find films that represent that. But I know, and I'm sorry, it might have been you, Eleanor that reached out to us and said, hey, maybe you should have a movie that's done by women. And then I went back to that massive list that like people have had recommended for films. And that is literally the only movie, Jennifer's Body, that was written and directed, or at least either one of those things, by women. So that is sad. And that was like very eye-opening. Not that I was necessarily surprised, but I mean, and that kind of just goes to show again, like how representation is super important. And like Jess just said, topics of feminism and topics of a satanic feminism, maybe we should have this done by some women that are actually going to be relating to the subject matter. But literally that entire list, and it was a bunch of recommendations from a lot of people. I went through them. Jennifer's Body was the only one. I was like, yeah, no, that makes sense. And then we're like, oh yes, we're covering the succubus. So that's like actually just all perfect, all perfect.
Okay, great. All right. Yeah, because we're in such a tight schedule today. So
I know.
Okay. So let's finish here. And again, if people want to continue the conversation on Gather, you're very much welcome to. And just generally come to Gather because this is our last day. And you know, everyone who's been here the whole time, we'd love to chat with you and hear your thoughts about the festival. Yeah. And also this is a donation-based event, or it's a free event, but donations are welcome. So we have our PayPal there if you like to help us out there. And we also have merch. So if you go to our finalgirlsberlin.com/shop, you'll see our merch. And we also have new merch coming up in a month or so. So yes, be ready.
Can I just say that we're going to give ourselves like a 30-minute break. So in 30 minutes, we'll be in Gather to chat. Give us some time.
Sounds fair. Yes. Sounds fair.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for having us. It was a wonderful experience.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Bye.